This project is not going according to plan. I started work on the subject of this video on Monday the 9th. It is now Wednesday the 11th as I start actually editing this. We leave for vacation on the 16th, next Monday. In case it wasn't obvious, that vacation is my ultimate deadline. This entire project is for taking model trains on vacation with me, and if I don't have my videos done by then, I am screwed. I want to have a video out every week this month, and my laptop is not going to be strong enough to edit videos while I'm on the road. We already discussed in the previous video in this small series about how the tight time frame means that I can't do anything ambitious. This is why, aside from the kits that we'll be building today, most of this model railroad project is just stuff that I already had lying around. Well, I learned the hard way that I bit off more than I can chew. The 3 flat cars? Easy. I built all of them and converted 2 to gondolas on Tuesday. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. The box car is a piece of work. I was woefully unprepared for a resin kit. And now, I bought the box car like new, but it was second-hand, and it seems that played an important role in this because some of the materials were warped. The roof is royally screwed to a point that even my father said we should just give up on this. And I'll be honest, for how much I really wanted to get a boxcar on this train, for how iconic they are to railroading, giving up on it is a really strong contender for what is going to happen at this point. As I start editing this video, we are not done building it, and we really should be by this point so that I can focus on other trip-related things. It's eating into the careful schedule I had planned for this week. I might fail this. Well, okay. Let me calm down for a minute. This project as a whole isn't a failure. I did complete the 3 flat car kits, and I'm really proud of how they turned out. Let's talk about those. And even if I cannot finish the boxcar on time, I've done a lot of work on it, and I'm still proud of all that I've learned and tried to do in these last few days. And there is still a chance, maybe by the time I finish editing this, we finish the boxcar. For now, though, let's take a little bit of a breather and focus on what I know is complete. For these flat cars, I've actually built some of them before. I built them a couple of months ago, or at least very similar ones. I used the Kitwood Hill 20-foot flat cars for my Crest high-side gondolas. Now, the ones we're building today are 18-footers instead of 20-footers, so they're about half an inch shorter, but they are practically identical in design, which made assembly a cakewalk for me. I'm used to these. The first step was to cut out the material that we needed early on. Now, this wasn't actually all that much, since the frame and the deck were already separate pieces from everything else, so all we needed to do at first was the sides and the ends so that we can glue them onto the frame. Now, I do sometimes paint the pieces before I glue them, but that runs the risk of warping the wood, especially on longer pieces like these sides. And since these pieces are all going to be the same color in the end anyways, I figured I would just wait to paint them. For the car decks, however, I painted those before assembly. Like all other flat cars and gondolas that I've built before these ones, I went for Ceramcoat Territorial Beige for the car deck. It's a nice wooden tone that, when intentionally painted unevenly, makes this great textured appearance in combination with the base color of the wood. As the decks were drying, the wood glue had dried to enough of a point that I was ready to paint the car sides. Now, I wanted something colorful, and I'd originally considered painting these in green, but I instead decided to go with something a little more common on freight cars, and went with Badger Model Flex Light Tuscan Oxide Red. It's still colorful, it still pops out, but it's a little more in line with what you would expect. While that dried, I wound up cutting some pieces of wood in preparation for the gondolas. For the sides and the ends, I used one of my personal favorite materials for scratch building, 1/4 inch by 1/16 inch strips of wood. For the car's size, I cut them to the length of the car, 4.5 inches, 18 scale feet, and for the ends, I cut them to 1 3/8 inches wide. Now, initially, I cut the ends to 1.5 inches, since that's the width of the car between the stake pocket cutouts and the car's deck, but I did not account for the car's sides, and in the end I had to trim 1/8 of an inch off of every piece to make sure that the sides were not sticking out too far. One problem with these kits is how lightweight they are. Fortunately, Kitwood Hill designed them with plenty of space for you to add weights below the car deck. Unfortunately, thanks to the cross braces for the truss rods on the underside, most weights that we have are too big, and I had to wind up using lead weights. I also had to wind up washing my hands immediately afterwards, since my father had just finished making dinner, lead is bad to ingest, and I happened to eat with my fingers a lot. Now, for one of the cars, I wound up sticking the weights on from the underside, since I didn't have one long string of weights to use, like I did for the others, that would cross the gaps in the cross braces while also having all the weight that I wanted to add. I actually think this method worked better overall, and I should have explored this idea first, but, well, too late for that, I guess. In the future, I think I'll give adding weights from the underside more of a shot. With the weights in place, though, the car deck could be glued on. Now, some of the decks did wind up warping thanks to the paints, so I had to add some temporary weight to hold them down as the glue dried, but fortunately that was easy enough to deal with. The flat car bases, at this point, are practically complete, so it's on to building the gondola sides next. I took the strips of wood that I cut earlier and painted them in the Badger Modelflex Light Tuscan Oxide Red like the sides from before, getting my fingers uncomfortably red in the process. The paint confused me a ton when I was cutting my hair later that night. How did I cut myself? Oh wait. Before I got around to putting together the sides, I wanted stakes for these gondolas. For the first of the two gondolas, I got around to cutting some 3/32 of an inch square strips of wood to a length of 1/2 inch. I also cut a couple of 1/32 by 3/32 strips. Now, 3/32 of an inch is a mildly convenient measurement because the holes in the flat car decks that are designed for stakes are about 1/16 of an inch wide. Now, 3/32 of an inch is a little too big by exactly 1/32, but in a way which fits snugly into the notch of the car. There's just enough pressure that you're able to get it in and it holds itself in place. The car ends are where I'll add the 1/32 of an inch thick stakes. I don't know why, but it just feels right to have the ends be a little bit flatter for some reason. I'm not entirely sure why I like things this way, I just do. And with that, the first gondola is practically done. I did finish it off camera, but I think you've seen the parts that you need to for this. Assembling the second gondola wasn't much different from assembling the first, though there were some differences that I'd like to point out here. Firstly, the stakes were cut longer, 3/4 of an inch compared to 1/2 of an inch. This is simply because the first gondola was a single board low side, while the second one is going to be a 2-board medium side gondola. However, I did cut 4 additional stakes that were only 1/2 an inch long. I had an interesting idea that I wanted to try out with the second gondola to set it apart from the first even more than just being slightly taller. Now, since this was a medium-side 2-board, I glued the 2 parts to each side together before assembling them on the car itself. Oh god, wait, did I forget to mention gluing the sides onto the car itself earlier? Whatever, you know what I'm doing. Now, the interesting bit, however, and the reason I cut the 1/2 inch stakes, was the car ends. I thought it would be fun to have them be inset somewhat. So I tried that, using the 1/2 inch stakes as braces on the car's decks, and putting the slim stakes over the ends of the sides. And if I'm being honest, I think this looks a little silly. But not bad, I guess. I think it would have been a little more interesting if the sides didn't extend all the way to the ends of the car, but whatever. I think this is okay. With our flat car, low side, and medium side gondolas finished, we just needed to add spacers for the trucks, screw on said trucks, and screw on couplers, and bam! We're both done, and out of excuses to not talk about the nightmare boxcar. While this boxcar is causing me many headaches in the present, it's not like I came into this project unprepared. My father gave me tons of tips, and I asked him for help repeatedly throughout this project. For instance, he recommended cleaning the resin before starting work, so we did this on Sunday, ahead of schedule, to give the parts some time to dry. And it's not like this car was realistically that far outside of my scope. The basic assembly was easy. For the frame and car walls, we just used some CA, and I did my best to make sure that each segment was squared off against each other. This car was stubborn, though, and put up a fight. I kept accidentally tearing it apart. I think some of the pieces that I had were a little smaller than intended, or something, since it felt like there were more open gaps between the pieces than there were supposed to be. Not to mention the warping issue that I brought up earlier at the very beginning of this video. That might be my own fault, though. While I did buy this second-hand, and that might be part of the cause of this issue, I also didn't store the parts in a sealed bag, so I might be to blame here. It's been nearly a year since I bought this. The roof, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, is where the real trouble began. First of all, there was the main roofing material and the subroof structure, which we actually had to assemble together. At first, this wasn't so bad. I just used magnets and clamps to hold everything together while the glue dried, but the farther up the car I went, the harder things got. The clamps weren't all that strong, and any point that wasn't being held down by a clamp would just flex and split. The roofing material would not stay in place. The roofing material wasn't the only problem, though. The subroof was clearly warped. There were considerable gaps between the main car body and the subroof. It looked terrible, and we really didn't know how to fix it. And that's where our story ends, right? What are we supposed to do without a car roof? Buy another kit? I mean, I have considered doing the Banta Model Works Fat Albert for a while now, but I can't wait for one to ship in. We don't have the time for it to arrive. Maybe I could bring another boxcar that I already have, but I don't have anything as small as this one, so the replacement would take up more space than I'd like. My father actually suggested that we just scratch build an entire boxcar of our own, but while I'm comfortable with scratch building, I think an entire boxcar is just a little more ambitious than what I'm willing to do, especially with the time frame that we have. And thus, the final suggestion came in. Give up. We have what we need. A train set to bring on vacation that shows what I can do as a modeler. It doesn't matter if it's the best, it matters that it works. But then, something clicked. Something I hadn't considered. Something I needed said back to me to truly understand. Something I wasn't quite ready to pull off, but something that was the only way to have any chance to finish this. My father mentioned scratch building a whole car, which was way too much work for now. But the core idea stuck, and I realized the way forward. Scratch build just the roof. This is it. This has to be it, right? I've already been scratch building the gondola sides. Sure, I'd have to use styrene, which I'm not really used to, but it can't be that different to wood, right? All I need is the right measurements and I can make anything. And my father has quite the collection, including some quirky ones. One of the funniest parts about building this roof is that we actually used HO sidewalk styrene for this. It's actually quite convenient, as sidewalk styrene has squares etched into it, and squares form straight lines, which actually makes it easier to cut the sidewalk styrene. Now, yes, the sidewalk does look worse on one side. We are trying to get a flat roof texture, but we can just use the back side and have that facing up and the sidewalk facing down, right? So we wound up using a .04 thickness, 3/16 of an inch square sheet of styrene sidewalk. For each half of the roof, we cut about 5 squares by 23 squares. This means each half of the roof was about 15/16 of an inch by 4 inches and 5/16. For the sides and the internal supports, I cut into a .02 thickness sheet. Now, I didn't have any exact measurements for this, and I kind of just had to eyeball and hope I had things right. This was especially a problem because for the internal supports and the ends, I had to make sure that I got a slight angle. You know, roofs aren't flat. But I didn't have any measurements for that and kind of just had to hope I got it right. Fortunately, once I got the first internal support or end piece finished, I kind of just had a template for the others. Now, gluing everything together was a bit of a pain, and I definitely screwed it up a couple of times, but hey, at least this was tangible progress, right? To give the roof some texture other than boring and flat, my father suggested I cut some battens. I actually had to look up what those were. For this, though, we used .03 by .100 strips of styrene cut to 15/16 of an inch. In total, I cut 18 battens, 9 per side, and just spotted them by eye. For the roof walk, I initially used the original pieces from this set. However, I got to show my sister the work in progress, and she mentioned that it didn't exactly look the best with that bend in the middle of it. So, I scrapped the original roof walk and decided to cut my own out of the same styrene I used for the battens. It took me a bit to make the new roof walk, but I think it turned out good. With the roof done, I regained enough confidence to keep moving forward with things I had been neglecting, like the end ladders. Now, the kit provided wire to bend into shape for each ladder rung, but it didn't seem to have anything to bend them into shape, which initially scared me. But, with this newfound confidence, I just grabbed the plastic clamps I had been using and bent the wires around the handle of those to get them into shape. Once bent, I drilled holes for the wires to sit in using a 78 drill bit. It was the perfect size for a friction fit. At this point, most of the details that were left to add couldn't be added until the car was basically done, so we got to spray painting. First, we did a coat of primer on both the roof and the body before separating each for different colors. For the main body, I decided to go with Badger Modelflex Dark Tuscan Oxide Red. This is slightly different from the light Tuscan Oxide Red I used on the gondolas and flat car, but close enough that if anyone ever asks which cars I built most recently, I can just say, the red ones. As for the roof, I went with Badger Modelflex Grimy Black. Now, this is more of a gray than a black, if I'm being honest, but I actually like that about it. It makes the roof look more like steel, and this is a steel boxcar, right? With everything painted, I gave the roof a coat of black wash. The wash darkens the color without outright replacing it, which when used in smart places can both highlight texture and act as some basic weathering. I also added some spots on the car sides just to spice things up. Now, since this is a steel boxcar, a couple of spots of rust can help add some character and make it look a little more aged. I used a mixture of orange and brown pan pastels to get the rust colors. I mostly put them on the roof and a little bit on the sides of the car, but I didn't really aim for realistic places, I just kinda put them where they felt right. We're reaching the final stages of this car. Next came the trucks. Wait, did I forget to mention what kind of trucks I used on the gondolas? Oops. Well, for all of these cars, I just wound up using KDHO trucks. The store my father works at accidentally ordered a bunch of a type that people don't buy very often, and so they've kind of been selling them at a discount for a while now, so we picked up 4 sets for pretty cheap. I want to say like $6 a pair? Now, the boxcar kit did come with its own trucks and wheels, but the truck was a kit, and I don't really have the patience for that right now. However, I did try swapping the wheels on the Katy trucks with the bigger wheels from the kit. It made the couplers ride too high though, so I had to downgrade back to the Katy wheel sets. Speaking of couplers, I just used Katy number 5s. Unfortunately, I could not get them to screw in for the life of me, so I wound up having to glue them in place. If I ever need to replace the couplers, it is going to be a pain. But I guess that's the trade-off of impatience and trying to get this project done in the last minute. After that, I just added some steel weights to bring up the total weight of the car to around 3.5 ounces, superglued everything together, cleaned up whatever loose ends I needed to, including some touch-ups on the paint job, and that was that. It's Saturday as I finish editing this video. I have only 2 days until the vacation begins. These last few days have been a modeling nightmare, but my god, the joy I have from completing this project is off the charts. This entire set, as I had originally planned for and hoped for, is coming with us. It's quite the story, and I am sure I'll have my fair share of chances to tell it to family. But that's not to say the gondolas and flat car aren't worth mentioning either. All 3 of them built in a single night? That's gotta be worth something, right? And everything here is a perfect example of my skills as a modeler and how much they've really grown since I started Owen30 modeling just a year ago. But I think it's time we pump the brakes. Oh my god, did I forget to mention the brakes on the... Whatever, I need to remind myself not every detail needs explaining. But I think it's time for me to take a well-deserved rest. It's Saturday, I have one last stream before I hit the road, and that's it. It's a well-deserved rest too, as I've finally completed all of my videos for this month. One for every Monday, all with this higher quality editing style I've been trying to refine. Also, please keep commenting what you like and dislike about this editing style. Feedback helps me to improve my content. I hope you've enjoyed today's journey as much as I have, and I hope to see you all next week for the finale of this little loop railroad, as I finally pack this all up and leave for my trip. Thanks for watching. Cheers, folks.